In a world where noise has become the norm and communication a never-ending stream of words, the Stoic seeks not mere silence, but inner clarity. This episode is an invitation to reflect on who surrounds us and how that shapes our ability to remain ourselves. We are not speaking about complete isolation, but about choice, a conscious, careful, sometimes difficult choice of those who do not steal our soul, do not cloud our mind, and do not replace our values with their own. The creation of an atmosphere of calm begins with inner intent. The Stoic does not seek solitude as an escape. He seeks a space in which he can hear himself. That space is formed not only within, but also without, through the people with whom we share time, thoughts, and silence. Our surroundings are a mirror that reflects our freedom. If those around us constantly demand reactions, approval, or participation in their dramas, then clarity becomes a luxury. We live in an age of hypercommunication where silence is perceived as strange and distance as coldness. But the Stoic knows, outward activity does not always equal inner life. To be among people and still remain oneself is an art worth learning. The contrast between external sociability and inner clarity is not a conflict, but a choice. One may speak without losing oneself in the voices of others. One may listen without dissolving in their emotions. Choosing one's surroundings is not selfishness, but care for one's own integrity. Those who do not steal your soul are the ones who respect your silence, who do not demand you to be someone else, who do not impose their anxieties as a mandatory agenda. They are the ones who can be present without pressure, who value depth over loudness. In this part, we will reflect on how to recognize such people, how to preserve inner freedom in a world full of voices, and how to become someone who does not steal another soul. Part 1. The Stoic Understanding of Environment. Stoicism is a philosophy of inner freedom, clarity, and resilience. At its center is the human being, striving to live in harmony with reason and nature, undisturbed by external circumstances. Yet the Stoic does not live in a vacuum. He is surrounded by people, events, opinions, and the noise of the world. And his relationship to this environment becomes a key element of Stoic practice. Environment as trial and choice. From a Stoic perspective, one's environment is not merely a social background, but an active force that can either strengthen or undermine the inner structure of a person. The Stoic does not strive for isolation, but he recognizes that not every closeness is beneficial and not every accessibility is safe. He chooses his surroundings not for convenience, but for alignment with his path. Epictetus, one of the most prominent Stoics of later antiquity, said, "If you want to be free, learn to refuse what does not depend on you." This applies not only to things, but also to people. Epictetus taught that our inner space is a sanctuary that must be guarded from intrusion. He compared the soul to a fortress that must be protected from passions, from chaos, from the opinions of others. Our surroundings, in his view, should not destroy that fortress, but help to reinforce it, protecting inner space. The Stoic understands that inner calm is not a given, but the result of discipline. He does not allow himself to be drawn into the whirlwinds of others' emotions, does not yield to manipulation, does not live for approval. This requires not only strength, but conscious choice, whom to allow into one's space and whom to keep at a distance. Epictetus emphasized that while we cannot control others, we can control our attitude toward them. If someone consistently disrupts your clarity, provokes anxiety, or demands constant attention, this is a signal. The Stoic is not obliged to be available to everyone. He has the right to limit his participation in order to preserve himself. Closeness and accessibility, an important distinction. The modern world often confuses closeness with accessibility. To be close is often understood as being constantly available, always responsive, always sharing. But the Stoic makes a distinction. True closeness is depth, trust, and respect for boundaries. Accessibility, on the other hand, is an open door without filters, constant vulnerability to the moods of others. The Stoic can be close without being universally accessible. He chooses when and with whom to engage in dialogue, and when to remain silent. He does not fear being misunderstood, because his aim is not to please, but to preserve inner integrity. This is not coldness, but maturity, the practice of Stoic choice. Choosing one's environment is not a one-time action, but an ongoing practice. The Stoic observes how people influence his state of mind. He asks himself, does this person sharpen my clarity? Do they help me become better? Or do they sow anxiety, distract, and erode my peace? Epictetus advised vigilance about the company we keep. He taught that habits are contagious. If we surround ourselves with those who live in passion, we risk losing our resilience. The Stoic therefore seeks out those who respect his path, who do not demand self-betrayal in the name of friendship, who can be present without suffocating. The Stoic understanding of environment is not a strategy of isolation, but an art of choice. It is the ability to see who helps preserve inner freedom and who steals it under the guise of closeness. Epictetus teaches us to guard our space, to distinguish depth from superficiality, and to remain mindful of whom we admit into our lives. In a world full of voices, the Stoic seeks silence, not absolute silence, but the kind in which one can hear oneself. And environment is not merely background, but a part of that silence. By choosing those who do not steal his soul, the Stoic chooses freedom. Part 2. Who steals your clarity? Inner clarity is not just a state of calm, but the ability to see the world and oneself without distortion, without excess noise, without the projections of others. Yet in every life, there are those who cloud that clarity. Not always intentionally, not always consciously, but the result is the same. After the interaction, one feels drained, doubtful, anxious. The Stoic learns to recognize such people, not with judgment, but with understanding and the resolve to protect his inner space. Energy-draining people are not always aggressive or malicious. Often they come with complaints, with drama, with endless stories in which they are the victim and the world is unfair. They demand attention, involvement, sympathy, yet they do not seek change. Their energy is a whirlwind, easy to be pulled into if one is not attentive. Signs: after interacting with them, you feel empty. Conversations circle endlessly around the same problems without progress. They use manipulation, guilt, resentment, pressure. Their presence demands constant emotional engagement. They do not respect boundaries and intrude into personal space. Consequences for inner state. If such interactions are not recognized, clarity begins to fade. The Stoic loses focus, begins to doubt himself, is drawn into foreign emotional scripts. This is more than fatigue. It is the gradual erosion of one's own position, values, and peace of mind. Seneca, reflecting on harmful relationships, wrote, "Nothing is more destructive to character than a bad companion." He emphasized that the soul, like soft wax, takes the shape of what it touches. If we surround ourselves with people who live in passion, complaint, and chaos, then our soul too begins to waver, losing stability. Complaints, manipulation, drama. This triad is how clarity is stolen. Complaints create a constant background of demand for attention. Manipulation keeps us bound, denying us freedom. Drama imposes constant tension, making calm impossible. The Stoic is not obliged to be a savior. He may sympathize, but he does not dissolve. He may listen, but he does not get pulled in. He may remain present, but without losing himself. The practice of observation and discernment. The first step is observation. The Stoic learns to notice not only words, but their effect. He asks, does this interaction sharpen my clarity, or does it cloud it? The second step is discernment. Not every emotional expression is harmful. Not every complaint is manipulation. But if an interaction becomes a constant source of anxiety, then it is time to reconsider its form. The third step is action. This may mean limiting contact, changing the mode of communication, or refusing to participate in another's scripts. The Stoic does not fear being misunderstood because his aim is to preserve inner freedom. Clarity is not a luxury, but a necessity for living in harmony with oneself. Those who steal it are not always enemies, but their influence demands vigilance. Seneca teaches us to treat ourselves with care, to choose our environment not out of habit, but by essence. The Stoic observes, discerns, acts. He does not shut himself off from the world, but he chooses those who do not dim his light. Part 3. Friends and allies. Stoicism does not reject friendship. On the contrary, it gives it a deep philosophical meaning. For a Stoic, a friend is not just a companion in life, but an ally in the pursuit of virtue, a mirror in which character is reflected, and a support on the path to inner freedom. Friendship in the Stoic understanding is not consolation from loneliness, but a form of mutual growth based on respect, honesty, and the striving for wisdom. Qualities of a Stoic friend. A Stoic friend is someone who does not cloud your clarity, does not demand that you abandon yourself, does not manipulate emotions. He does not seek profit, does not play roles, and does not fear to speak the truth. His main qualities are virtue, reliability, self-reflection, and respect for the freedom of another. Such a friend can be present without pressure, supports you without replacing your will with his own, is not afraid of silence, and does not require constant confirmation of closeness, respects boundaries and does not invade inner space, strives for honesty even when it is inconvenient. A Stoic seeks not those who entertain, but those who help him become better. Friendship becomes not comfort, but a challenge. To be worthy of trust, to be honest, to be resilient. Friendship as philosophical practice. For the Stoic, friendship is not just a social bond, but part of the philosophical life. It requires discipline, observation, and discernment. Seneca wrote that a friend is a second self, but not in the sense of a mere reflection, rather as a partner in the pursuit of good. Friendship becomes a space where one can be oneself without fear of judgment, but also without avoiding responsibility. The Stoic does not seek many friends. He knows that true friendship is rare, requires time and inner maturity. He is not afraid of solitude, because for him, solitude is not emptiness, but the chance to hear himself. And it is precisely this ability to be alone that becomes the basis for choosing the worthy. Marcus Aurelius on support. Marcus Aurelius, emperor and philosopher, often returned to the theme of friendship and support in his meditations. He wrote about how important it is to have those near you who help preserve reason, who do not give in to passions, who can remain calm even in a storm. He valued those who do not flatter, but speak the truth, who do not demand but offer, who do not condemn but understand. One of his principles was to be grateful for those who help preserve virtue. For Marcus, friendship was not comfort, but strengthening. Support, in his view, was not an emotional reaction, but a rational participation in the life of another without losing one's own stability. The ability to be alone as the basis of choice. A Stoic is not afraid of solitude. He knows that only in silence can one hear oneself. Only in solitude can one discern true desires, fears, and aspirations. This ability to be alone is not escape but preparation. It gives strength not to depend on others' opinions, not to seek approval, not to fear being misunderstood. This very ability becomes the basis for choosing friends. The Stoic does not look for those who fill a void, but for those who respect it. He chooses those who can be present without breaking the silence, who do not demand but offer, who do not steal the soul but help it unfold. Friends and allies are not just part of life, but part of the philosophical path. The Stoic seeks those who help him remain himself, who respect freedom, who strive for good. Friendship becomes the practice of virtue, a space of growth, an alliance of the rational and the honest. Marcus Aurelius, Seneca, Epictetus, all spoke about the importance of one's surroundings, the strength of true friendship, and the necessity of being careful with those we let into our hearts. The Stoic does not fear being alone, because he knows only one who can be alone is capable of choosing the worthy. And in that choice lies not only the protection of clarity, but its unfolding. Part 4. Digital noise and inner order. The modern person lives in a stream of information that never ceases for even a minute. Social media, news feeds, notifications, comments, videos, memes. All this forms the digital environment in which we exist. But the Stoic knows, not every piece of information is knowledge, and not every kind of knowledge is good. Digital noise can destroy inner order, cloud clarity, and rob a person of the ability to reflect. Stoicism does not propose escape from the world, but discipline of perception, a diet for the mind based on discernment, detachment, and conscious choice. The influence of social networks and news. Social media is not just a communication tool, but a mechanism that shapes perception of reality. They create the illusion of closeness, urgency, significance. The news feed dictates what is important, what is troubling, what should concern us. But the Stoic asks, does this truly concern my life? Does it really help me to become better? Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You can be happy if you confine your thoughts to what depends on you." Social networks and news often present things that do not depend on us. Other people's opinions, conflicts, disasters, gossip. Constant consumption of such information produces anxiety, irritation, and a sense of helplessness. The Stoic seeks inner freedom, not endless reactions to external irritants. Information waste. Information waste, we already spoke of this in the previous video, is data that carries no value, does not contribute to growth, and does not strengthen the mind. It is endless headlines, superficial opinions, emotional outbursts that demand no reflection, but only reaction. They clutter the mind as garbage clutters a house, invisibly but destructively. The Stoic understands that the mind is an instrument that requires clarity. If it is constantly filled with others' anxieties, comparisons, irritations, it loses the ability to discern. Information waste makes a person reactive rather than rational. It distracts from what matters, from one's own life, from one's values, from one's practice. A Stoic diet for the mind. Just as the body needs healthy food, the mind needs pure, nourishing content. The Stoic diet for the mind is not rejection of information, but its filtration. It is the choice of what is worth reading, listening to, discussing. It is limiting time in the digital environment, refusing meaningless scrolling, consuming content consciously. Principles of such a diet. Reading primary sources rather than summaries and headlines. Limiting time on social media, not out of habit, but necessity. Choosing sources that promote reflection, not agitation. Regular periods of silence. No screen, no feed, only oneself. Reflection on what has been read, rather than mere consumption. Epictetus taught, what matters is not what others say, but how you respond to it. The Stoic diet is a way to preserve the ability for rational response, rather than automatic reaction. The practice of detachment and content filtering. Detachment is not indifference, but the ability to observe without being absorbed. The Stoic views the news stream as a theater. He can understand what is happening, but does not have to play a role in every scene. He filters content by asking himself questions. Does this strengthen my clarity? Does it help me become better? Or is it just noise? Filtering is a skill that requires discipline. The Stoic learns to distinguish where there is information and where manipulation, where there is knowledge and where just a background of anxiety, where there is fact and where mere interpretation. He does not reject the world, but chooses how and when to interact with it. Practices: morning silence, beginning the day without a phone, with reflection. Information fast, a day or an hour without news and social media. Keeping a journal, recording thoughts rather than reactions. Conversations with wise people, not with algorithms. Conscious consumption, not by habit, but by choice. Digital noise is a challenge for the modern Stoic. He cannot change the world, but he can change his attitude toward it. Inner order is the result of discipline, discernment, and conscious choice. The Stoic is not afraid of silence because he knows it is precisely in silence that clarity is born. Social networks and news are tools, not masters. The Stoic uses them but does not submit to them. He filters, detaches, chooses. He builds inner order not in spite of the world, but within it. And in this order lies freedom, resilience, and the ability to be himself. Part 5. Practices of cleansing the environment. Stoic philosophy teaches us not only to reflect, but also to act. In a world full of distractions, emotional pressure, and intrusive connections, inner space requires protection and care. Cleansing the environment is not an act of rejection, but an act of self-care. Care for clarity, for the ability to live in harmony with reason. It is a process that demands attention, discipline, and courage. Below are practices that help the Stoic preserve inner freedom and choose those worthy to be near him. Morning reflections. Setting the tone for the day. Every morning is an opportunity to begin anew. The Stoic uses this time not to check the news, but to set the mind. Morning reflections are a short inner conversation with oneself in which questions are asked. What today depends on me? Which emotions am I ready to observe without giving into them? With whom will I interact, and how can I preserve clarity? Marcus Aurelius began his day with a reminder. Today I will meet people who are rude, envious, deceitful, not in order to become embittered, but to be prepared. Morning reflections are a shield that helps one not dissolve in others, but remain oneself. Evening self-examination, honesty with oneself. In the evening, the Stoic sums up the day. This is not self-flagellation, but an honest look at the life lived. Seneca recommended asking oneself questions. What did I do well? Where did I give in to passions? With whom did I interact? And how did it affect my state? Self-examination is a mirror that reflects not only behavior, but also the quality of one's environment. If, after interaction with someone, anxiety, irritation, or fatigue arises, this is a signal. The Stoic does not ignore such signals, but uses them to adjust his circle. Visualization of communication. Anticipation and choice. Before meetings, calls, or correspondence, the Stoic may use the practice of visualization. He imagines how the communication will unfold, what emotions may arise, what words may be spoken. This is not fantasy, but preparation. What do I want to preserve in this interaction? Which boundaries am I ready to set? How can I avoid losing myself in others' reactions? Visualization helps not to be caught off guard. It gives the opportunity to choose in advance one's position, tone, and reaction. This is especially important in difficult or emotionally charged interactions. Meditation on solitude, strengthening the foundation. In Stoicism, solitude is not a lack, but a resource. Meditation on solitude is the practice of being with oneself without external irritants. It is a time to hear one's own thoughts, recognize desires, and separate what is truly one's own from what belongs to others. The Stoic does not fear solitude because he knows only in it is true closeness born, closeness to oneself, to reason, to the nature of things. Meditation can be simple, sitting in silence, observing the breath, listening to the inner voice. It is not an escape, but a return. Solitude strengthens the ability to choose. The one who knows how to be alone does not cling to destructive ties. He does not fear distance because he knows that his worth does not depend on the number of connections. Gradual withdrawal from destructive relationships. Not every bond should be preserved. Some relationships are habits, fears, or emotional dependencies. The Stoic does not sever them abruptly, but begins a process of gradual withdrawal. This may include reducing the frequency of communication, changing the format of interaction, refusing to participate in others' dramas, an honest conversation about boundaries. Epictetus taught, if someone prevents you from being virtuous, withdraw from them. This is not cruelty, but maturity. Gradual withdrawal is a way to preserve oneself without destroying the other. It is an act of respect for oneself and for the one who, perhaps, is not ready for depth. The Stoic does not seek conflict, but he is not afraid of being misunderstood. He knows that clarity requires space, and if someone constantly obscures this clarity, it is worth reconsidering the closeness. Cleansing the environment is not rejection of the world, but a choice in favor of inner order. Morning reflections, evening self-examination, visualization, meditation on solitude, and withdrawal from destructive ties are tools with which the Stoic preserves the wholeness of his soul. Conclusion. Freedom is not simply the absence of external restrictions. It is the inner right to choose whom to let into one's space, whose words to allow to sound in one's mind, whose emotions to let touch one's soul. The Stoic knows clarity does not come by accident. It must be protected, cultivated, and guarded from those who, even unintentionally, overshadow it with noise, anxiety, and manipulation. Environment is not only people, but also information, daily rhythms, and inner dialogues. Everything that enters us forms us. And so freedom begins with a filter: whom I listen to, with whom I speak, what I read, what I respond to. This is not isolation, but maturity, not coldness, but care, not pride, but respect for oneself. You have the right to silence, to pause, to solitude that does not wound, but heals, to refuse participation in others' dramas, to the choice to be yourself, even if it is not always convenient for others. You have the right not to explain, not to justify, not to be constantly available. This is not selfishness, but a form of inner autonomy. Clarity is a light that must not be extinguished under the weight of others' expectations. It is a space where one can think, feel, and simply be. And every step toward this clarity is a step toward freedom, not from the world, but within it, not against others, but in harmony with oneself. May your day end in peace. May your thoughts settle like water after the wind. May inner silence become your home and clarity your guide. You deserve a space where you are not stolen, but respected, where you do not lose yourself, but find yourself. Good night and pleasant dreams. May they be as pure as morning air and as deep as your own soul.